So I just wanted to say a very warm welcome to everybody. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Claire Byrne, and I'm the Senior Community Manager for RSA US. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of Octavia, Stephanie, and the RSA US team, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this month's US Salon, titled Breaking the Stigma, Supporting Women's Mental Health. So before we get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on the RSA US, and cover some kind of ground rules and reminders about today's event. So founded in the UK, we are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. Today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organization, and we're committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platforms, and unique global network of 30,000 change makers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of the roughly, I think it's 31,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work here in the United States, including Octavia, who's with us today. And RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the United States with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to our moderator, Octavia, today and introduce Octavia, I'd like to cover just a couple of reminders about today's event. So like I touched on already, it is being recorded, so you will have access to the recording tomorrow, and I'll share that with all of you who've registered via Eventbrite. But more importantly, this is a really inclusive space. This could be a difficult topic for a lot of people, talking about mental health. So we really do want you to feel safe. It is informal, and also with that in mind as well, being respectful of the language that we use and how we show up in this space. I always say use language that your mother, your mom, or your mom would approve of. And bring a spirit of collaboration to this space. So free from judgment or monopolizing the conversation or kind of taking over the conversation, so to speak. So just be mindful of those things. And then respecting each other's time, boundaries, and feedback. And then lastly, the chat is available for you to raise points of clarification. No question is a silly question. If you don't want to ask a question just to everybody in the chat, you can feel free to DM me directly, and I'm at the RSA US events handle. And I will do my best to answer your question, but we will have a Q&A section at the kind of towards the end of the event. So feel free to come off mute and ask your question directly then, or you could just pop it in the chat. So without further ado, enough of me chatting. I would love to introduce you to Octavia Goredema. So I'm just going to spotlight yourself there, Octavia, to make sure folks can see you. So Octavia Goredema MBE FRSA is an author, career coach, and the founder of 2010 Agency. She is the author of Prep, Push, Pivot, Essential Career Strategies for Underrepresented Women, heralded by Management Today, Cosmopolitan, and Refinery 29 as one of the recommended books of the year. An acclaimed career expert, Octavia's insights have appeared in Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, CNN, CNBC, and Los Angeles Times, amongst others. Originally from England, Octavia was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen in recognition for her work. She is also a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, where she leads the Gender Equity Network in the US, a host of today's salon. And Octavia serves as an ambassador for the Pankhurst Center, the iconic site of women's activism, past and present. She is based in LA, where she has lived for over a decade. So delighted to have you with us, Octavia. I'm going to pass over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, stop chatting, and we'll get the conversation started. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I've been a fellow of the RSA for over a decade now, and I'm so proud to lead the Gender Equity Network here in the United States. Now, we host these virtual salons to bring people together from inside and outside of the RSA to share perspectives, discuss strategies, and to forge connections. Now, we've just marked the end of Mental Health Awareness Month, which has been observed in the United States every May since 1949. But we are hosting this conversation because we know that mental health and wellness extends beyond a calendar month. Paying attention to our own mental health and developing the skills to support the mental health of others on a consistent basis matters more than ever before. Inequity, gender-based discrimination, caregiving responsibilities, postpartum depression, and menopause are among the contributing risk factors to common mental health conditions for women. Now, according to the Mental Health Foundation, around 1 in 5 women have a common mental health problem. In addition, A recent poll commissioned by CVS Health found nearly half of working mothers surveyed were diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Today, we're going to discuss how to destigmatize mental health topics and share actionable steps to support our well-being with our special guest, Stephanie Sorady. We'll be discussing how intersectionality impacts women's mental health, how to support someone who might be experiencing a mental health crisis, and habits that we can embrace to boost our own mental health. And now, I'd like to introduce our special guest. Stephanie Sorady is a psychotherapist and author, passionate about destigmatizing mental health topics. Stephanie is the author of 2 books, Kiss from God, a mental health poetry collection, and the Better Habits Workbook, designed to help you get unstuck and reach your goals. I have my copy right here. It's amazing. Stephanie uses her personal and professional experiences to advocate for mental health and wellness, with particular emphasis on the Latin community, as she's the proud daughter of a Mexican immigrant. Stephanie was born and raised in Los Angeles, and that's where she's joining us from today for this fireside chat. Stephanie, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Octavia. It's so nice to connect with you. Thank you, Claire. And thank you, everyone who is here today. I'm really excited.
So I have a number of questions for Stephanie, but it's important that we answer your questions too. So if you've just joined us, please do use the chat, post your questions there, and we'll be holding space later in this session today to make sure we address as many of the questions that we possibly can. So please do share your questions in the chat so that we can answer them. So let's get started. Stephanie, you're a psychotherapist and an author. Can you tell us what led you to the work that you do now?
Yeah, of course. I think, like many in the field of mental health, I was actually drawn to mental health due to my own experiences with it, with mental health issues in my family, mental health issues that I started experiencing as a young adult as well. I remember first taking a psychology course. I was very fortunate to do this as a senior in high school. And that's when it all started clicking for me, that there were answers and explanations for a lot of what I was experiencing, and I was hooked and I had to learn more. That's what led me to majoring in psychology. I got my bachelor's at USC in psychology, and then ultimately got my master's in social work at Columbia because I loved the social justice perspective on mental health, which is what led me to that degree. And I think my own experiences with mental health really helped me as a clinician. I think best clinicians can really empathize with their clients. It's not that we can have every experience out there, but we understand sort of what it feels like to struggle.
Yes, thank you for sharing your journey with us. Now, based on your own personal experiences and your perspectives as a clinician, what are some of the common misconceptions surrounding women's mental health?
Yes, and I'd say the biggest one that comes to mind that I do see, that I personally experience and I do see a lot, is this sort of societal stigma misconception that women are just overly emotional. Women have
Stephanie, I'm struggling to hear you. Could you?
Oh, you are?
Yeah, can everyone else hear Stephanie? A little bit? Yeah.
If I hold this up, does it help?
You might need to, a little bit. Thank you. Sorry. I just
No
didn't want to make sure we could
problem.
all hear you.
Of course. Is this good enough?
Is that good? Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for letting me know.
Yeah. So going back to that, the common misconceptions that you see surrounding women's mental health.
Yes, it's very unfortunate, but I do see it's very common for women to be sort of written off as being overly emotional.
Yep.
I see this happening from family members to women, unfortunately medical providers to women, and women will often do this to themselves. They tend to undermine what they're experiencing because we have this stereotype that women are being moody or dramatic. And that's one of the big barriers to accessing mental health, because obviously we know emotions are not gendered. Everyone experiences a wide range of emotions. Gender has nothing to do with having feelings, right? It changes your experiences, but not necessarily the ability to have emotions. But if we are able to sort of combat that stigma, it's going to be a lot easier for women to not see their mental health needs as weakness, because seeing it as a weakness is what inhibits folks from getting help. Oh, I'm sorry, I still see.
Yeah,
The sound is really low.
Yeah, it cuts in and out. Sometimes I think it's picking up on a different mic. So let's see if we can fix your audio. I want to make sure everyone can hear what you have to say.
If I disconnect my headphones, is that better?
Keep speaking. Let's see.
Let's see. We're testing. Is this better?
Possibly.
Or is the same? So sorry, everyone.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, you just cut in and out occasionally, but I think this might be better. If anyone can't hear Stephanie, please let us know in the chat, because Claire is helping us in the chat, because we want to make sure that we can hear you clearly. So there are so many things to consider in terms of, especially what you just shared, in terms of these misconceptions that there can be around women's mental health. And then there's also very unique considerations related to intersectionality. Can you tell us, as a clinician, what your observations are on how intersectionality also impacts women's mental health?
Of course, I think that's such an important topic to discuss when we're talking about women's mental health. I just want to make sure, can you all hear me better now?
Really quiet.
Really quiet. Oh no. Okay, let me finagle around with my settings a bit.
Yeah,
you apologize, everyone.
No worries, no apologies needed. These things happen. We're not in control of the Zoom tech. It's totally fine. We're showing up how we're showing up. You take your time.
Okay, give me one moment. I'm gonna hop off camera to see if I can fix something. I'll be right back.
Okay.
No worries. Okay. We've had a bunch of questions coming in through the chat anyway. So,
brilliant. Okay, please, everybody, keep your questions coming, because I want to hold space for everyone who's joined us today to have the opportunity to at least connect with Stephanie when she comes back. So yes, this is the perfect time to drop your questions in the chat. And maybe, Claire, I don't know if you've done so already, maybe you can share some links to Stephanie's work as well, just while we're waiting for her to pop back. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Not a bother. I have done that, but I will pop some more in, because I know some folks that just joined us.
Yes, because some people just joined.
Yeah, no worries at all.
And I can take a look at who has joined while we wait for Stephanie to come back. Thank you, everybody. Oh my goodness, California, Ohio, Carla in Reading, hello, thanks for joining. Vancouver Island, that's Claire. I thought it was another Claire for a minute.
Getting too excited there now. Just me.
Yes,
just me.
New Jersey. Big, thanks so much for joining.
I'm just going to pop some more of Stephanie's social links there. Yeah.
Yes, please do. Stephanie has an incredible Instagram presence, and a lot of what we're going to be discussing today, I was inspired to ask her based on what she shared on Instagram in terms of her videos. We're just talking about you, Stephanie.
Lovely. How about now? What's the sound like now?
It's kind of the same, unfortunately.
It's kind of the same. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of an
but you
echo,
know what?
But
we'll keep going. Just project your voice as much as
possible.
Yes, as much as you possibly can.
Got it.
Okay, so thank you so much. So based on what you've shared with us about a lot of the misconceptions that there are around women's mental health, around some of the really unique considerations that we can face, what are some of the best ways to de-stigmatize the topics that impact women? So we're not just having these conversations at events such as these, but that we feel equipped to have these conversations in our daily life.
Right. I'd say the first thing to do for anyone is to make an effort, which everyone here is already doing, and that's great, is to make an effort to educate yourself on the subject of mental health, the different mental health topics, as well as what you touched on previously, how intersecting identities, whether that be racial identity, gender identity, other sorts of experiences that we have impact our mental health. we luckily live in a time where that information is at our fingertips. We just need to make sure they're coming from the right sources, from licensed professionals, right? But educating ourselves can often help us feel less intimidated when talking about these topics with friends, with families. And that's the first place to start. And I apologize again for the sound. I've also been told that I have a very soft voice, so that does not help me in this situation. I apologize.
Stephanie, you do have a soft voice, because I know I've spent time with you
Yes.
outside of Zoom. You do, but yes, project your voice as much as you possibly can, because yes, I want to make sure that we all can hear you. Now, I want to talk about your brilliant new book.
That's so sweet of you. Thank you. You're so kind, Octavia. Thank you for
Better
having
Habits
that.
Workbook. It's not kind. It's fact, because this book just, I've read it twice already, and I've got lots of folded pages to go back to all the bits that just really impacted me. And you talk about so many things, but one of the things that was like an aha moment for me was you talk about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you explain to anyone who's not familiar with that what CBT is and how it can actually help us to manage stress?
Yeah, CBT is one of the earlier therapeutic interventions. It stands for, as you mentioned, cognitive behavioral therapy. And as the name implies, it looks at our thoughts and our behaviors and our emotions. So it looks at, there's something called the cognitive triangle, which you see in the book. It looks at how thoughts influence feelings and how feelings influence behavior. So CBT can help us, whether it's on its own or in conjunction with other techniques. It can help you get unstuck from these sort of negative thought patterns or negative behavior patterns that you might be in. It's often combined with mindfulness, because mindfulness helps us to raise awareness of our thoughts, our environment, our behaviors. CBT is something actually that I really recommend for folks, because to a certain extent, you can do it on your own, not just with a therapist. There are lots of workbooks like mine or journals that can help you start the CBT process. Obviously, you can go more in depth with a therapist to identify sort of the root of those thought patterns, but CBT is a super accessible tool for folks to use.
Brilliant. Could you give us an example of one type of thought pattern that it can help with?
Yes.
Just as an example.
Yes. I'd say a common one that folks have, many of us experience feeling nervousness when presenting at work, for example. If you're going to give a big work presentation, your thoughts might start to spiral as everything has to be perfect. That's a very common thought pattern that I hear. And I do hear it a lot with my female identifying clients. Everything has to be perfect. I have to be perfect. I have to do things perfectly. Those thoughts are going to impact how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the presentation. And those feelings are going to influence how you behave. You might procrastinate if you feel like things have to be perfect. That's my go-to. Yeah. If I think things have to be perfect, I'm going to tend to procrastinate. Or you might overexert yourself. You might overstress yourself. So what CBT can help us do is to reframe that thought that things have to be perfect. And it could reframe it as, instead of thinking that things have to be perfect, why don't I just get started? Why don't I focus on step one? Yeah. Step one might be reviewing your notes for the presentation. And just getting started, doing that step one, reframing the thought, may change your feeling about it. Instead of feeling like things have to be perfect, you might feel like this is more manageable. And that's going to, again, change your behavior, and that you've gotten started and you're working towards your aim.
So when we talk about actions, in your book, you state something very simply, but it was just very profound to me. And you explain that habits are the building blocks of life. And you say,
absolutely,
they are the seemingly small but significant actions that you take regularly that impact every area of your physical, mental, and social well-being. So as we talk about our mental health, and with that in mind, that habits are the building blocks of our lives, what are some of your favorite mental health habits that you have embraced based on your own experiences that you shared with us so openly at the start of this conversation? What are some of your favorite mental health habits, and that you could also share with us as well also?
I'd say the first thing that I would recommend to anyone, if you are looking at changing your habits, because they are the building blocks of your physical health, your mental health, and even your relationships, your relational well-being, I would look at sleep. If you're just getting started, look at your sleep habits, because sleep is also very foundational to mood, to physical health, to our ability to concentrate, creativity. All of that beautiful stuff happens while we sleep. Our brain gets ready for the next day. So I would look at your sleep habits. A really common one that we're all guilty of is looking at what you do right before sleep. Are you scrolling on your phone? Are you looking at a screen right before sleep? Consider swapping that habit with something else that still feels very enjoyable to you, but is a better wind down. For example, for me, it's reading. In lieu of looking at my phone, I put whatever book I'm reading on my pillow so that I know that's the cue for me. It is time to read. And that helps me wind down, and that helps improve my sleep quality overall. So start looking at your sleep and what habits you might be able to tweak there. In addition to sleep, I have a lot of mental health habits that I rely on. A big one for me, I talk about it all the time, is journaling, which sounds very cheesy, but it is super supportive because it gives us a space to get our thoughts out of our head and onto the page. And journaling does not have to look fancy or complicated by any means. It could be as simple as giving yourself a single page to dump out your thoughts before you start the day. And that can help sort of reduce the mental chatter that a lot of us experience throughout the day so that you have more clarity. Journaling is, again, another one of those therapeutic tools that you can use on your own, and it's pretty accessible to get started. And then I'd say a third mental health habit is learning how to breathe, which I know sounds silly because we're all breathing all the time. But what we've seen in research is that a lot of people who have anxiety or depression tend to have more shallow breath throughout the day. So learning how to breathe and how to breathe more mindfully, just even if you set aside 5 minutes every day to practice deep breathing, that can really help improve your mood, that can help reduce stress and anxiety. So I'd say those are my big 3 mental health habits that I would get started with. Pick a habit related to your sleep, find a journaling practice that works for you, and find a breathwork technique that you like that you can practice for 5 minutes a day.
Thank you for sharing those. I love the cue that you have created by literally placing your book on a pillow. I think that's genius. So simple, but very impactful. And journaling and the breathing. I really want to talk about that in more detail. I had my first panic attack that I've ever had during the pandemic. It caught me completely unawares. I ended up going to the ER because I thought I was having a very serious medical emergency. And what I discovered after that was breathing for the first time. Could you expand on what you just started to share there and maybe actually show us what you mean? A breathing technique that if we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed, what is something that we can actually do in the moment?
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing that, Octavia. That is actually what you shared about going to seek medical help for a panic attack. That is a really common way that folks recognize that they are overstressed or they're having more intense anxiety, because it quite literally feels like a heart attack. They're very hard to distinguish from each other. I have been there, I have felt that. And one of the biggest prescriptions, so to say, that folks get for that is learning how to deep breathe. It's also a really simple and accessible tool. I'm happy to share a little bit more. A really easy tool that I love to teach folks is box breathing.
Oh, what's that?
Box breathing is really nice and easy because all you need is your breath and you need to count to 4, and that's about it. So you're going to start with inhaling through your nose for the count of 4, and then you're going to pause for the count of 4. You're going to exhale through your mouth for the count of 4, and then you're going to pause again for the count of 4. And you can repeat that. We'll go through it together. We can repeat that as often as you need until you feel physical signs that you're a little more calm. Maybe the muscles in your body have relaxed a little bit. Maybe your heart rate has gone down. Once that starts to happen, it's worked and you're good. So let's try it together.
Okay.
I'm gonna, everyone, wherever you are, get comfortable. And I want you to start by breathing in through your nose, and we're gonna count for 4. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4. We're gonna hold. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. It's hard to do while talking, but
I'm sorry.
no, I just realized that it's hard to do it and explain it at the same time. But if you visualize that when you're counting for 4, you're creating a little box. There's 4 sides to the box. That's easy to remember. Box breathing, and you just count to 4. Or honestly, even if you want something simpler than that, just practice deep breathing, just like exactly what it feels like. Practice breathing from your stomach versus your chest.
Yeah.
If the box breathing already feels like that's a little too advanced, just practice. You can put your hand on your stomach. That's a nice way to measure if you're breathing from your stomach. You'll feel it expand and shrink. You just practice what it feels like to breathe out of your stomach instead of your chest. This is the shallow breathing that a lot of us are prone to.
Yes.
The diaphragmatic breathing is calmer.
Thank you for demonstrating that, Stephanie, because I am still learning about techniques such as these. But when I first started really paying attention to this, I realized it's so simple, but so impactful. And the prompt for me to start looking at my breathing was when I started meditating for the first time, also during the pandemic. And
Yes.
the realization that I spend way more time charging my phone than I would spend just even stopping and being still just for 10 minutes, even just for 10 minutes. And what an impact that could have on me. It's just so profound. So I want to talk to you about our mental health can be negatively affected by certain situations that we find ourselves facing.
Right.
What are some of the ways that someone can reach out for help? And how do you know if you need a therapist?
That's a really, really good question, because so many of us are just in our heads and feel like we need to figure this out on our own.
Yep.
I really recommend, if you have a support in your life, whether that be a friend, a partner, or a family member, to just start talking to them about what's going on for you. If you're feeling more anxious, if you're feeling less motivated, just to start broaching the subject with that person can already, I mean, research backs this up, that sharing our experiences can already relieve some of the stress and burden.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're considering whether or not therapy is right for you, some of the good ways to know that are if your emotional experiences that are distressing you are persistent.
Okay.
So if you experience anxiety, that is a quote unquote normal human experience. We all have anxiety. Anxiety serves a purpose. It's a fear response to protect us. But if you feel that your experience of anxiety is persistent, that you are experiencing anxiety regularly or during times where you wouldn't necessarily be anxious, you're sitting at home and you feel very anxious. If that persistently happens, that's a good sign that you may want to seek support. Additionally, if it's starting to impact, if your mental health, whatever that looks like, is starting to impact your functioning, your ability to care for yourself, your ability to show up in your relationships and connect with others, that's a really good sign that it's time to seek additional support. And you can start the search for a therapist even just by talking to your primary care provider.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they will have a referral for you. They will know a clinician. Or you can call your insurance. If you're in the US, you call the number on the back of your insurance card, or you can go to a directory.
Yeah.
And those are the three places I tend to recommend folks start the search at.
Yeah.
And just acknowledge that this is a difficult situation that you're going through. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you did something wrong or that there's anything wrong with you. It just means you need to talk to someone about it. Similar to if you're having chronic pain,
yeah,
that's not your fault, right? You didn't deserve chronic pain. You're going to go to your doctor and you're going to say, hey, I've been having this pain in my shoulder persistently for the last couple of weeks. Nothing's working. Can you recommend someone to help me out with it?
Yeah.
Reframing it.
Thank you for sharing that perspective on how to perhaps make your own self-assessment and then what some of those next steps could be, because I know when I was looking for a therapist for the first time, I had no idea where to start.
Right.
How do you determine who would be the right person to support you? And I want to frame a question for perhaps anyone listening or watching who is concerned about the mental health of someone they care about.
Right.
What are some of the signs of a mental health crisis, and what advice would you give someone on how to navigate this if they're observing this?
That's a really good question as well, because that can feel so daunting and scary, especially if it's someone we love, to broach that subject. I would say if it's someone that you know well, you know what their baseline behavior looks like.
Yes.
You know what their normal energy levels look like, what their mood more or less looks like on a regular basis. A good sign that something else is going on is that that starts to change. Either their mood drastically increases, it's very, very elevated, or it drastically decreases. They're really, really low. Same with energy. Their energy levels are really, really high all of a sudden for a consistent, unusual amount of time, or really, really low. Those are typically the signs that something else is going on. And it could be a physical health issue, it could be a mental health issue. Either way, you would want to make space for having that conversation with the person. And in order to destigmatize that conversation, I would share that exact observation that you're having. Not saying like, hey, you're acting weird. That's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah.
I would share the observation. Hey, so-and-so, I noticed you're a lot more tired lately.
Yeah.
Is something else going on? How do you feel about that? How are your energy levels? How do you feel? That usually is enough to give the person space to share. Actually, yes, you're right. I have been tired lately. My motivation's been really low. I just don't feel like doing anything. Once that person opens up, I always encourage folks to just validate how they're feeling. You don't need to try to cheer them up or provide solutions. Really, the key here is to validate that person's experience.
Yes.
And to appreciate that they shared this with you, because as we know, we're all here because we know this subject can be very vulnerable.
Yes.
So appreciating, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That sounds like it's really hard.
Yes.
And then lastly, if the person's open to it, just saying, hey, would you like for me to try to help you find someone to talk to? Do you need support there? And if they say no, respecting that no for now.
That's a very helpful framework for starting the conversation. My final question for you before I open it up to questions that we've received is, if someone perhaps doesn't have the awareness that their behavior has been changing, or they're not open to having that conversation, are there any resources that you'd recommend for anyone watching or listening in terms of what they might want to review in terms of how to what to do next in that situation?
Yes, one of the best mental health resources for everything from substance use disorders to potentially experiencing psychosis, anxiety, disordered eating, a really great place to start is NAMI. I'll put it in the chat as
yes,
well.
Please do.
It's NAMI. This is an international organization that has loads of information, very reputable mental health educational resources, as well as crisis lines, therapist directories. NAMI is a wonderful source to get started if you don't know where to look to.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Claire, I'm going to turn it over to you now in terms of questions.
Sure. Hello, everybody again. There's been a ton of questions coming through, so I am just going to pick at random. And so thank you so much all for sharing your questions. And I encourage those of you who did pose questions in the chat to come off mute if you're comfortable doing so, or share your video camera so we can see you, but no pressure to do so. So I know, Carla, you had a question there around, where did I put it? You said, what advice would you have for managing spiraling anxious thoughts? So Carla, I don't know if you would like to give more kind of context to that, or you want to share some more and ask our lovely panelists here.
Hello, everyone. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think I've just noticed recently that I've had a more overwhelming, well, I get quite anxious sometimes and get quite overwhelmed. And my head tends to spiral. And then there are thoughts in my head that kind of overwhelm me. And I just wondered what kind of tips you have for me to manage that. Because it can be, in the moment, it can be quite difficult to kind of pull yourself out from that. So yeah, and it's both professionally, I would say, and personally.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Carla. I hope you can hear me. I want to apologize again.
Yeah,
okay, good. I'm glad. Well, that is a very common experience. It doesn't mean that it's a pleasant one by any means. But I would start by saying the tools that I'm going to share, I want you to practice them when you're not feeling those spiraling thoughts, to see what works for you, just to see like, oh, I really like doing this tool, or I like this exercise. And when you have ones that you like, make a list of those tools, keep it on your phone. That's what I do. So that in the moment, when you feel the thoughts begin to spiral, you can look to that list and just pick one and go. Because like you said, it's really hard in the moment to think of all the tools you've learned because you're already spiraling. That being said, some of the tools that I really recommend would be, I can show it to you right now. One that really helps is a part of the type of therapy that I do. It's called EMDR. It sounds very fancy. It's just a way to help calm the brain. It was a really simple way of saying it. Help to reduce distress. The tool that I'm going to show you is called a butterfly hug, which sounds super cute, which is nice, but it's also very effective. Hopefully you can hear me while I try to hold my mic up. You're going to cross your arms and you're going to start tapping one side and then the other. It makes the shape of a butterfly. That's why it's called that. And you're going to deep breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. You're going to move in that motion. The butterfly hug is a form of bilateral stimulation. Bilateral stimulation basically helps your brain to process all of those big spirally thoughts in a more effective way. So instead of getting stuck, it's going to help you move through the thoughts. So tapping is a really great tool to start. You can also tap, if this doesn't feel good on your arms, you can tap on the tops of your thighs. So putting your hands on your lap, you can tap one hand and then the other. And it's that movement of one and then the other that causes the bilateral stimulation. And that helps your brain move through those negative experiences more quickly. And then pairing that with the deep breathing, like we talked about, sends signals to your body that we're okay. We're okay right now. We're taking nice deep breaths and we're going to get through this moment. So I would try doing tapping with the deep breathing, as well as one that I mentioned earlier, but I'm a dork and this is what I love to do. I would journal. When you're really spiraling, let it out. Having those thoughts floating around in your head feels so awful. Get them out of your head and onto the paper. Don't let yourself stop until it feels like you've gotten it all out there. And then if you feel comfortable keeping that journal and looking back at those times that you've used the journal to share your anxious thoughts, you might start to see patterns. And those patterns will help inform what you do in the long run to address it. Is it that like, wow, it's really coming up when I spend time with this person, or it's really coming up in this environment, and what can I change to reduce the anxiety? So I would try tapping, deep breathing, journaling, and just keep a list of these tools. Keep a list of what works for you. And in the moment, go to that list.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you so much again for sharing, Carla. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Carla. I appreciate that. And that's super helpful advice. I was trying the butterfly technique there as well. Feels nice. Tony, I know that you had 1 or 2 questions, specifically the first one about recommendations for how to support folks going through a difficult time. So do you want to maybe elaborate on that question and share here? And I'll spotlight you. Hello, Tony.
Hi, hello. Can
Hi,
everyone hear me?
Tony.
Hi.
Yes.
Love this. First off, thank you all so much for this conversation. It's so beneficial, and I really appreciate everyone's vulnerability and transparency and just presence in this space that we're co-creating together. So my question, I have a lot of questions, but the question that I put in the chat was, how can people who have different identities than others or than one another, I should say, who, when someone who has different identities than me is spiraling, is experiencing, the plethora of feelings and emotions and things that they're going through, how can I best support folks who have different identities than me? I think is essentially what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Thank you so much. I think starting with, it obviously depends on the situation, but starting with asking that person, hey, I'm noticing you've come to me a few times, you're really stressed, it sounds like you're spiraling a little bit. What can I do to best support you? Sometimes the person is going to say, I just want someone to listen to me. You could say, sure, I can listen to you. If for you, listening to that person feels out of your scope, like they might need more support, I would recommend that. I would say, I'm happy to be here, to be a friend to you, to be a support to you. But you know what? It sounds like talking to a therapist might be helpful as well. If you've been to therapy, I always recommend mentioning that if you're going to recommend therapy to someone. It helps a lot. For me, folks know obviously that I'm a therapist, but aside from that, I do go to therapy. So I reference that. I say, I was talking about something really similar with my therapist. Have you ever thought about talking to a therapist? And if they feel overwhelmed, yeah, but I don't know where to get started, sort of like Octavia mentioned. If you feel like you are comfortable doing so, offering to help them find someone. And if they have an identity that you don't identify as, there are therapists of all different backgrounds that you can connect them with. There's a really great resource, I believe, at least here in the US, called Inclusive Therapists. Inclusive Therapists is a directory where you can filter things from gender identity, racial identity, sexuality, all of these things to find someone that you feel like will understand your experience a little bit better. Oh my gosh, that was so fast. Thank you for putting that in the chat.
Yeah, no worries. I move fast. I'm like a sleuth behind the camera. And thank you for the question, Tony. Was that helpful? Did that answer your question? Great.
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I appreciate your cat just showing up there. For like little therapy support cat. That's
yes,
great.
exactly.
They're great for that. Thank you so much. And I know there's a bunch of other questions here. Tanya, you asked a few different questions. So if you are, I know one was about giving grace to do practices kind of in the moment. And I know you also had a couple of other questions just come up there that I may not have captured. But if you're comfortable coming off camera or chatting at all, Tanya, please feel free to do. Oh, there you are. Okay, I'm going to add you as a spotlight. Over to you, Tanya.
Can you guys see me? Because I can't see myself. Okay.
Yeah, we could see you.
One of the questions I had was about how do you practice giving yourself grace to experience, to give yourself self-care? You know what I mean? Like, you can't pour from an empty cup, but at the same time, it's so many demands that you have to feel like you have to be that strong person and have to keep going. But when you want to take that moment for yourself, it feels selfish. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's and we're here specifically talking about women's mental health. This is totally like anecdotal, qualitative evidence that I have, but I've worked with a lot of women, I've worked with a lot of men. That is something I hear personally a lot more from anyone that identifies as female, is guilt when caring for themselves, which says a lot about what society has told us about ourselves, right? We are meant to give. So understanding and questioning, where is this resistance? Where is this guilt coming from? Aside from society, it may be messages that you received growing up. It may be role models that you had. And just having that increased awareness can help you to, like you said, have grace for yourself in the moment and say, I know where this is coming from. I know why I have this stuff. I know I have this guilt. It didn't start with me, but I can address it now. Right? It didn't start with me, but I still have the power and the ability to take ownership of this and to change it for myself and for others. And recognizing that you are a human being and you have just your humanity means that you are worthy of a little time and space for you. There's actually a field of study on the topic of self-compassion, which sounds really relevant to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a great researcher, Dr. Kristen Neff, who has a lot of meditations, journal
I actually have
prompts.
her book right here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm going through it, and it's a long journey.
Yes.
But it's
and acknowledging that. Yeah.
Right. It feels like society saying, but you got to do it right now, but it didn't happen overnight. So the healing, it feels like society's like, well, you need to heal right now, but it takes a while. It's a journey, but society makes us feel like, no, you need to do it now.
Yes, I agree. This is not the case for everyone, but I personally have been in therapy for at least 4 years, on top of going to graduate school for mental health, on top of being a clinician. And I am so amazed sometimes at how much work there is to do. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another thing that I didn't recognize or I didn't think of. But just giving ourselves, like you said, I love the word grace, right? Because that's what we give to others. Giving ourselves that grace, pretending you're talking to someone you love, really visualizing that person and saying, it is okay that you need the space to work on this. You are worthy of that. And that makes you a better person for all the people that I can imagine you're serving in your life. It really does. Does that answer your question, Tanya?
It does. It does. And then my last question is, I've been going to a lot of different groups and a lot of different therapies and things.
Yeah.
And practicing like sky meditation, which is the Sudarshan Kriya yoga meditation. And a lot of people say, and I want to know from a clinician if it's true, like when you're working through trauma and you have that anxious feeling, is that the release of negative emotion?
That's a really good question. I will say, I don't know if everyone's going to experience it the same,
right?
But I will say when you are processing trauma, especially if it's more complex trauma is what we call it, like either long-term trauma exposure or multiple different sources of trauma that's considered complex.
Yes.
There is a lot of energy and resistance as we go through the process, and that's totally normal because we have learned how to live with our trauma. We've learned our own coping strategies, right? We've learned the roles that we play to manage the trauma. And if we're kind of dismantling it all to start over, it doesn't always feel great.
Right.
It can be really tough, and it can feel like a lot if you are working with a clinician, which is why I recommend working with a clinician for trauma. That's a great thing to bring up with them. Is, hey, I'm feeling this increase in anxiety, or I'm feeling this, like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. That's a really rich space to look at together.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tanya, so much. And I actually just had a quick question kind of following up from that, which is not a fully articulated thought, so bear with me as I multitask and try to answer this question. But kind of following up on what Nancy said there about, sorry, did I call Nancy Carla? I may have, did I? No, okay. Just making sure. But that Nancy said about, you know, the kind of how we give ourselves the space to care for ourselves and care for our mental health. And so how would you suggest those of us who maybe have had different experiences of mental health in our past, or different parenting or different cultural norms that have influenced how you process and deal with mental health? So, I mean, I have an Irish background. In Ireland, there's been like a wave, like a sea change of mental health over the past 10 to 15 years. Typically Irish people, like, you buckle up and you get on with it. Obviously that's shifted a lot, but that's been kind of so embedded in so many cultures. So if you're the culture that you have grown up in and is influenced, whether it's dismissed mental health, whether you buckle up and get on with it, pull your boots up, or all these different expressions, or you lean into it, and like how to have those nuanced conversations, or in your community, in your culture, with family, when it's so at odds with maybe where you're at or how you've evolved into a relationship with your mental health, if you want to call it. I hope that made sense as a question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's a really common thing that I hear, is folks feeling nervous to talk to their family specifically. I'd say less so with friends, maybe because those are folks that you chose to have in your life. It's more likely that their values are similar to yours, but with family can be really tough. My mom is an immigrant from Mexico. My dad's like second or third generation Irish American. I'll share that they thought my career choice was very odd, and they were not very supportive. So I have that experience of trying to share with them and getting resistance. So I want to tell people, yes, you should try to have these conversations with your loved ones. It's really important for your healing, and it can also be really helpful for someone else's healing, even if you don't see it in that moment. But also prepare yourself that they may not be on board. And that's actually not a reflection of you. It's a reflection, non-judgmentally, it's a reflection of where they're at and what they're okay with in that moment. So if you try to open up the subject and share that you've been feeling really depressed with a family member and they are not receptive, as nuts as this sounds, don't take it personally. That person's not ready to hear it yet. But that doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be heard. You just need to be heard by a different type of person.
Totally. No, that's great.
And in order to breach the subject, I would use the same analogy that we've mentioned. I know maybe can sound a little bit cliche, but it is true. Is sharing with your family. This is really similar to like physical health. If I had a chronic illness, I'd want to talk to you about it. And I have chronic anxiety and I want to talk to you about it. And seeing if that sort of parallel helps to reduce the stigma in the moment enough for that person to be open to hearing you.
No, that makes sense. It's been a really common, when I've had conversations with, especially with female friends, it's been a common thread, of like that nuanced kind of space. So thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Appreciate it. I know that we had so many probably other questions that I didn't even get to flag, and we're running short on time, but I feel like, thank you, Tony. I feel like we covered a lot. This has been a really beautiful, vulnerable, giving space. Yeah. I feel like everybody has shared beautifully and just kind of shown up in such a compassionate way for this conversation. So thank you all so much. For those of you who did register via Eventbrite, we will be sharing a link to the recording, and there's been tons of resources. I've been like frantically typing and capturing everything. So I'll share all of those with you, as well as links for Octavia and Stephanie. And our next Gender Equity Network event will be September 7th. So more information to come if you are interested in the topic of gender equity at large. We're still working out the details, but we'll be posting some information on our website over the coming month or so. So save the date. But I just wanted to pass over to you all, Octavia and Stephanie, for any kind of closing thoughts or comments, and thank yous.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. I was taking notes while you were talking to me and answering all of the questions. So thank you so much for your perspectives and all of the insights and guidance that you just so authentically shared with us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining and contributing and sharing. It's always an honor to have the opportunity to connect with so many people from different corners of the world. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Claire, for providing us with this space. So thank you, everybody.
Happy to. And Stephanie, any closing comments from yourself?
I just want to say that a group like this, thank you, Octavia. A group like this is so energizing for me and inspiring to see, because you all were so compassionate and engaged, and you were patient with my tech issues. So thank you so much for making this space, for having these conversations. This is where changing the stigma on women's mental health begins, on events like this. So thank you so much for Claire and Octavia for having me here. This meant so much to me. Thank you.
Oh, we appreciate it. And don't ever be worrying about tech glitches. It happens to all of us when we least want it to, right?
Of course.
So,
Yes.
but I will love you and leave you all. Thank you for joining, for participating, for bringing so much compassion and vulnerability. Have a lovely, wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and enjoy your weekend. Take care, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.